Thank you very much, and everyone can hear me? Yep, great. So thank you for being here. My name is Sangsoo, and today I'm going to talk about the think, build, ship, and take your Android OpenSource library. And in these days, I believe that we are using a lot of open source libraries. And this talk is about how to make and release your open source library. I'm currently working for the Spotify as a senior Android engineer, and I have the blog post and then also about the Twitter handle in here. So let's talk about the open source. When you hear about open source, what is in your mind? When I think about open source, the first thing is about show your work. I mean, your source is really valuable for the other people. Maybe you think that this is a little bit not that great, but actually it is really valuable for everyone. And you know, when you also share the code, our attitude is totally different. I mean, I know that that's going to be used by the other people, so I want to make it shiny or really make a good quality. So that's also helpful for me. And the other thing is that because the source is now the public, other people can learn from your source code. And not only they learn that, they also can point at, oh, it seems a little bit long code, so can you fix this one? Or they can point that. And not only about pointing, sometimes they also fix that. So they're going to make about the pull requests, and then your code is getting better and better. And it is not about just their branch or the repository. They usually make about the upstream or the master. So everything is up to date and then also better. And doing the open source is not only helpful for you. Actually, that's really helpful for the company. That is, I believe, that really good advertising. And you probably heard about that, like the Facebook, the open source library, or the Google, or I mean, those like the companies. When you hear that, you think they are leading the industry. And for me, finally, that is kind of fun things. And Spotify has free open source projects, and there are many. You can check that. Go to the spotify.github.io. And I want to just highlight one thing that is called about the Hub framework. Right now, this is only open source for iOS, but will come soon for Android. And this is component or the backend-driven UI, the development or the framework. And let me show you how it works a little bit shortly. And commonly, the backend has only the data. They don't know how to render that. Usually, the rendering part is determined by the client. The main idea is that to return some render type and from the backend. And you can think that this is a really similar concept like the HTML. Like the B tag is about the bold font, or E is about I is about italic. And the client, like web browser, knows how to render and just render it. In here, I will add the two components. And imagine that the left side is about the backend code. And let's see. And unfortunately, the video seems not working, but what I want to show that the left side is about the backend code, and then whenever I add something, and the right side is about client. And there is no change about the client code, just like the HTML, just render that. And this is not about the web view, more about just native renderer. So we can just personalization or a lot of things much easily. So we've talked about open source, and what about the open source library? I believe you heard about Dagger 2, dependency injection, Picasso, image loading library, RxJava, and OKHTTP to load about HTTP requests. And Guava is about the common library by the Google, and AutoValue. And there are really more, and I believe you at least heard about the one. And unlike open source, the most beautiful part of the open source library is about this one. You only need this about one line, and that's it. And every dependency or every library will be downloaded into your repository, and you can just use it immediately. And there are two kinds of the open source library for the Android. The first one is about the Java, and the second one is about Android library. So let's talk about the Java library first. And I'm going to show you how to build that. This is the process line, think and build ship. And let's think. And here is the Spotify chart view. And chart entity has three status: up, down, and equal. And you can see there is like the triangle or circle icon. And the left side is about the JSON data from the backend. To show the icon from the data, you can imagine this kind of logic. So if that is about up and equals to status, and then show the icon up or down and equals. However, this logic requires about every time there's a string comparison with the equals, and also sometimes there's also can be happen about typo. And what about using the enum? And then the code looks like that, and then we don't have to compare strings anymore. So let's try to build this one. So main logic is that we just ignore about case, and because that is not that important. So even though there's a different case, just to match as a string up or up every the different case as a enum the status up. But there is also like some edge cases. One is about how about there's some unknown value. So first strategy can be about throwing some exception, and second can be just return null because it is hard to put some value. And there is also another edge case about the dash because dash is not allowed in the enum value. So we maybe need to some kind of conversion to support that. To start, let's make the new project and then click the no activity because we're going to make about the Java library, Java library. And until now, the Android Studio does not support about the Java library like immediately. So we have to go through this process. And then let's create a new module and then create the Java library. And then I'm going to call that the library as a library, and then I also put some the package name. When you check about the settings.gradle, there is two. One is about app and the other is about library. The app was created when you create about the project, but that's what we want to use. So let's remove. And when you about the think about Gradle, it says that, oh, this is not used anymore. So do you want to delete? So click the OK, and then you can delete the directory itself because we don't want to use that. And here is the source code about the enum the parser. I'm not going to explain about every code because the focus is more about how to release the Android library. Before going to the release step, but I want to highlight about some of the unit tests. So this is about unit tests, and you can see that class is called enum parser, and there is some method called the for class. And it ignores the case, so every different variation is just go to the status up, and the down and equal is the same. If the value is unknown, and it returns null by default, and there is another method called like the parse strict, and it will throw an exception if the value is unknown. Lastly, it also supports some variation, so it can cover about dash, which is not supported by the enum. So we have the library, and let's ship it. We are doing the open source library to ship that there are two parts. One is about open source. For now, your code is in your machine, and that's it. And you need to open source first. So how can you do that? I mean, this is really simple things. You just need to push your code in the public place. And there are really many public places, but I believe that GitHub is the most popular one, and it has a really handy like the features. Something about the release or the code review. And also, it has a nice documentation tool inside. And the really important part is that integration with other tools, such as Slack or the Travis, or etc. So you can create a repository in the GitHub, and you can push your source code. Now you made a source, and then your code is now in the public place. So, is this open source project? How many people think this is open source project? Great. Actually, not, because of the license. By default, it has exclusive copyright. I mean, you upload it into the public place, but you didn't say that how other people can use that. You need to explicitly say that what others can do with your the code base. And how to add and which license do you need to use? And there are 3 popular licenses, and these are things. There are MIT license, Apache 2.0 license, and GPL version 3 license. And left is really weaker one, and right is really stronger one. I mean, there are more, but these are the popular license. And compared to MIT and Apache 2.0, in Apache 2, it allows to use about the patent use, but whenever you modify the source code, you need to state some change. And GPL is a really stronger license, so you need to disclose the source code, and you also need to use the same license. So if you don't have any the idea about what you need to use, and LOP guideline is set for the personal project, just use MIT, and that is easy start. And if that is about a little bit more the public use, and you can choose about Apache 2.0. And GitHub supports a really easy way to add a license. You could add it when you create about the repository. So you can choose about this one. But we already create about the repository. In that case, you can click to create a new file in the GitHub. And when you type the license, there is a button like the choose the license template. And then just choose about either MIT or Apache 2.0 or GPL. And then they're going to just put the text what you need. So now we have the license. And this is enough for making the open source project. And imagine that you see about this repository, what you can do. And personally, I probably just skip this repository. Why? Because I cannot understand what this is for. And sometimes, or someone can say that the code itself could be a really good document, but I strongly believe that the high-level document is really helpful to understand the code base. So we need to write what it is project for and how to use. And the most important part is it open source or what kind of license. And it is really good to mention how can I contribute. If you want to know about how to write this kind of document, there is also a good course in the Udacity. This is sometimes a little bit serious topic, so they made some course. So write README parse. And now we have the document. If the file name is about the readme.md or markdown, and GitHub shows that right below about the source code tree, when people see this repository, they can see that. So I mentioned that how to use that, and also about the really important thing, the license. This looks good, but I think that this can be much better and used by the continuous integration batches. Sometimes you can push the code without testing or building, other things. In that case, the master can be broken. And other people can download the full the code, but they have no idea why this is broken. And with the continuous integration tools, you can show that the master is currently building successfully or not. And moreover, you can also show that the test coverage. So let's try to add about build state of batch first. So for that, we need the continuous integration tool. So for example, there's a tool called Jenkins or TeamCity. But for the open source project, I think Travis CI is good enough. And they support really well about open source project, and you can sign up with a GitHub account. And after that, you can choose the repository you want to enable the continuous integration. And then select the repository, and then go to the repository page. And you can see this message, because the Travis CI does not know your repository well. They don't know how to or what they need to do. So you need the configuration file. This is the travis.yaml file, and then you can add that into your repository. And because this is about Java project, what you need to do is only one thing, just one line. This is about the language Java. That's it. And Travis CI understands everything, and it will compile, and it will say that build is passing or not. And that will happen whenever you make some code change in your repository. And if you click that batch or build is passing, and you can copy the markdown the image, and then you can add into your readme file. Now the repository is getting shiny and shiny. And let's try one more batch about task coverage. I believe you are really great developer. You care about the quality. So of course you added about some the unit tests. So let's try to show about the unit test coverage. And Travis is a tool for the continuous integration. It checks whether the build is passing or not, but it doesn't track about unit test coverage. So for that, we need another tool called the coveralls. And you can also sign up with the GitHub account. And then same thing, you need to add your repository and just click that. And when you add this repository, that is ready to track the task coverage. But it only tracks about unit test coverage when it is given. It does not gather that information. So you need to send that information to the coveralls. And for that, we can use about some Gradle plugins. And one is about the Jacoco, and the other thing is about coveralls, the plugin. And Jacoco is going to generate about the test report in the XML format or the HTML. By default, it does not generate by XML, so you can enable that. And then you can add the Travis configuration. So whenever after success, try to run about the unit tests and then send that information to the coveralls. And coveralls are now showing that test coverage. Mine has 100%. That is really unrealistic, but that's really great. And you can also click the status, and then you can also copy the markdown image, and then you can add the batch. Now, the repository build is passing, and then code coverage is 100%. If you like really this kind of batch, there's a lot, and then one is about this is license, also can be a batch. And open source library, I've talked only about the open source parts, but let's try to say about the open source library part. The goal is to make your library usable with this kind of one line. That is the goal. To do that, we need to understand what happens when you add about this one. And you can check about the Gradle file, and there is a JCenter. So when you add that line, and it checks about this JCenter to get that library. And by default, if that is not found in JCenter, it goes to Maven Center. I'm going to cover that shortly, what is JCenter and Maven Center. And when that is found, and then it returns about the jar file, because this is about Java library, and then you can use that. And JCenter is a Maven repository hosted by the JFlow bin tray, and deliver library through the CDN, and it is the largest Java repository. And I will cover later, but it also supports a really easy way to upload your library into the Maven Center. So after sign up, you can click the add new repository, and then you can type about the project information. I call that the name is enum parser, and then the type is a Maven. I'm going to explain the Maven shortly later, and then license. And then you can click that import from the GitHub. And then you can click about the project. This is going to bring about your project information from the GitHub to the bin tray. Now you just need to upload your library. Before that, let's talk about a little bit Maven. The Maven is a project management tool and providing a way to help like the building dependencies or the release or distribution. This is a really similar tool to the Gradle. The reason to use about Maven is that because of the distribution, and it has a really good way to define the library. It defines the library like the three parts. One is about the group ID, and the second part is artifact ID, and third part is about version. And to describe that, it also used the POM file, like the project object model file, to describe the project itself. The Maven publish Gradle plugin helps to this process a lot. And after applying this plugin, you can mention that the group ID and version. And after applying this plugin, you can run this task published to Maven local. And when you run that, you can also check what is generated. You can see that there is a jar file about the Java library, and then POM file about the project description. And if you check about POM file, there is a group ID, artifact ID, version, and also about dependencies. And I'm currently using about the Guava library for this library. To download that, you can click this new version, and then you can tap your version name and the release date. But I highly recommend that don't do that manually, because you already create the library and you already mentioned about the version when you create about the jar file. This is possible, but you need to type again, and it is really weird. And probably you're going to release about this library many times, so let's try to automate. And of course, there is another Gradle plugin, and BinTray gives about the BinTray plugin, and you can apply the plugin, and then you can add the user and API key in the BinTray. And then just run about the BinTray upload, and that's it. And your library will be uploaded into the BinTray. And here is the screen after uploading your library. And is it done? Because we already uploaded the library, but actually this is not done yet. You can use your library because you uploaded your library, but you need to click here, send me URI, and you need to copy this repository URL. And so it looks like that. Why do you need to do that? Because you didn't upload your library into the JCenter yet. Let me explain about a little bit more. So here is your library, and there is a JCenter. When you uploaded your library, you upload it into your personal BinTray, not about the JCenter. And that's the reason why you need to set up about the Maven repository URL. And BinTray supports about syncing mechanism about your BinTray and JCenter. You can think that JCenter is a public place. And to do that, that is really easy. And there is a button called Add to JCenter, and just click that. And they're going to handle everything. So they're going to think about your BinTray and then JCenter. And when it is linked, and you can see this logo. Since this is released to the JCenter now, and then you can search it. That's it. Congratulations, you release your library into the public place. That is enough. But maybe you also want to try to release your library about another repository called the Maven Central. This is a bit more difficult than other things, the JCenter, but I believe that is really worth to try that. So let's see how and why. And Maven Central is a Maven repository hosted by the Sonatype. And Maven Central is more well-known because that is started much earlier than the JCenter. Because it is kind of old, and releasing process tool is kind of not great or fancy. However, they have the really good guideline about how to release the. First thing is that to release about the Maven Central, you need to create an account in the Sonatype. And you need to create a ticket to get approval about your group ID. So in here, group ID is about io.github.sangsoo. And they're going to review that, and eventually they will send you about this email, so you're approved. And then you can use that group. It is possible to upload directly to the Maven Central. However, it is much easier to going through the JCenter. We'll explain shortly why that is easier. And BinTray supports about syncing mechanism to JCenter and Maven Central. So after setting about every syncing, and when you upload to your bin tray, it will go to the J Center and also Maven Center. But let's try to do that manually first. And this is a screen after uploading your library. When you go to the Maven Center tab, and then you can see user key and then user password and sync button. When you click the sync, it should work, but you will get a lot of error. And validation failed. And it complains about that you don't have project description, URL, license, or etc. That is because Maven Central has some requirements. There are 3 parts. One is about the source code, and then Javadoc artifact should be included. And POM file should have enough information for the project. It should have project name or description or etc. And moreover, like Android APK, it should be signed for validation. If you remember what POM file looks like that, and it only has a group ID, artifact ID, and version and dependencies. So let's change that. To add the source code and then Javadoc artifact, you can add the 2 tasks in here, and everything is defined in the upper level. And to include required information into the POM file, you can add about this line, and you can add about those content. And after changing this build gradle, and then when you learn about the deploy, you can see that the POM file now has a lot of information. And finally, you need to sign your artifacts, and you can sign that directly, but the bin tray also supports a really good option. And when you go to about the repository and then click here about GPG sign, and it will sign using the bin tray account. When you click the sync again, and everything works, because that is now in the Maven Center, you can also search in the Maven Center. But again, don't release manually and use about the Gradle plugin. Because that is about bin tray, and then there is the task about the Maven Center sync, just add about the username and the password, and then it will automatically upload also the Maven Center whenever you release the library. So just one command is enough to release Maven Center and J Center. And having a batch to show that is the latest version, linked to the Maven Center is also a really good idea, because it can show that what is the latest version. In short, I believe that J Center should be good enough to release, but good to follow about the Maven Center requirements. We covered about the Java library. Let's talk about the Android library. Java library is a jar file, and an Android library is an AAR file. The main difference is that it can include about the resource files, such as layout or drawer and strings or etc. So let's think first. And Spotify client cover art is a duotone image. Not everything, but most of part is a duotone image. And duotone image is about the halftone illustrated, made from a single source, and 2 different colors. If you check about the Meetup application, they use more duotone images. Let's build a duotone image library. So same thing, let's try to create about the project. And I will call this library as a duotone image view, because this is a custom image view supporting the duotone. And click the no activity. And as I said, we're going to remove out this module. And then create a library module. And then in this case, this is about Android library. And type the library name and then module name. And as I said, there is 2 modules in the settings.gradle. And we don't need the app, because this is a totally library module. So delete the app and sync. And then delete also the app, the directory. I hope someday they just supporting about this process much easier without this process. And so this is a source code. And again, I'm not going to talk about the source code a lot, in detail level. Just this is a custom image view, and get the 2 colors from the XML. And then make about the duotone image. And this is XML. define the bus style because I want to set the value from the XML. And this is about Android manifest. And since this is a library, there's nothing, almost empty. And when the library is released, users can add the Gradle dependency and test it. But it is doable, but it's really good to just add also about sample application in your repertoire. So let's add a sample code. So again, create a new module. And in this time, phone and then the tablet module because we want to make about the application. And I'm going to call that this is a sample. And then just create an empty activity. And then finally add some of the code. And in this sample, I'm loading the same image into the two image views. And you can check that this is about the XML. There are two image views. One is about the normal image view, and below is about the duotone image view. And then I also mentioned about the color white and color black, so two colors. If you learn about this application, it looks like that. So it's making about the duotone image. So our code is ready to ship. I uploaded into the GitHub like before, and I also added about the document. Because this is about the UI library, that is a really good idea to add about some screenshot. And don't forget to mention about the license. Let's try to add also CI batches for the Android library. Build status is about also the Travis CI. And you can just log in and then also enable about the project. And in this time, because this is not about the Java project, this is Android, so you need to set about the language as Android, and there is a Java, the JDK, and the Android component. You need to mention that. And after that, everything runs smoothly, and then you can see build is passing. And you can add the batch in your repertoire. And test coverage. You can also use the same thing, the coverors. So just enable the repertoire in the coverors and set the build.gradle file. The main thing is the same, but in this time, I'm not using the Jacoco. I'm using about Jacoco Android, and I also mentioned about where is the Jacoco report test file. And then, almost same thing, after success, call the debug unit test, and then Jacoco test report, and then eventually upload to the coverors. And it works, and then you can check the status in the coverors. Of course, we are the great developer. I mean, that is not required about 100%, but this time 100% because this is a really simple application. And show that I'm 100% coverage. The artifact repertoire relation is totally same. The main different thing is that they are not returning to about the JAR file. They are returning about the AAR file because this is about Android library. So you can create about the JCenter, the repertoire, and I'm using the plugin, the Maven publish, but different thing is that I need to mention about where is the AAR file. When you learn about the publish to Maven local, you can also check about what is generated. There are now the AAR file and then POM file. And in JCenter, you can import from the GitHub. And then you can select your Android library project. And then you can publish or upload the library. To do that, don't do manually. There is a plugin called the Mintray. And then just there is information required user and key and package information. And then just learn about the Bintray upload. And your library is also in the Bintray. And you can see that there are two versions, 0.11 and 0.10. And I already about the linked to JCenter, so you can see the icon about JCenter. So now that is in the JCenter. If you search, now that is in JCenter. Again, this should be enough. And then let's try to follow the Maven Central requirements to release that. And if you remember the three things, source and Java artifact and POM file should have enough information, and artifact should be signed. To include the source and java.jar, and I added about 2 lines, and each line is from the above task. And the line is a little bit different, or the content, because the location or Javadoc is a little bit different. And then you can also include about the required information in the form file. And this is totally same as between Java and Android. To sign the artifact, you can go to the project setting and check box about the GPG sign. And then Bintray gonna sign up the library. And to sync automatically, add the Maven Center and user and password information. You don't have to create another ticket in the Sonatype or the Maven Center because your group ID is already approved. And how to release? There is just one line about the Bintray upload. And then it goes about your Bintray, and it sync about the Bintray and the JCenter. And then also think about the JCenter and the Maven. So Maven centers, everything will be uploaded. And if everything works, you can also search that in the Maven Center, and you can add about the decorate about your repertoire. So let's wrap it up. I strongly believe that your code is really valuable. So open your source. Maybe you think that the code is maybe simple. Mine was less than 100 lines, but it is also valuable for some people. So please open your source code. And don't forget the license. That is a really important part. If you haven't seen any the repertoire there's no license information, you can maybe mention about that or the pull request. And make some nice documents because other people maybe cannot understand everything. So high-level documents is really helpful. And continuous integration, building, and unit testing. And after that, you can release the library into JCenter or Maven Center. And you can also tweak the library if there's some requests in the GitHub, or maybe other people think that, oh, this is better code, so they can make the pull request, and then you can tweak your library. I'm going to share this slide, and there is open source repertoire I made about two things. One is about Java library, enum parser, and then Android library about the auto imaging view. Thank you very much. And is there any questions? Just let me know. Yep, thank you.
If you have a question, just go to the microphone.
Yep.
This is not directly related to your stuff, but I have a question about legal issues. So do you write those libraries in your free time or during your work time? Are you allowed to, if you write them in your work time, are you allowed to publish them open source?
In Spotify, we are doing some kind of modularization. So eventually every library is in a separate module. So we are doing in the work time.
Okay, so there's no problem with that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.